turning our attention now to the G20, where the baton has passed to India. The G20 presidency has been passed over now to India from Indonesia. You see visuals of the Indonesian president there, Joko Widodo, handing over the baton to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. India officially assumes the G20 presidency and will be hosting the G20 summit in India next year. Let me go across to Srinjoy Chaudhary for more on this. Srinjoy, we just heard the Prime Minister speak a short while back, give his G20 address, and now India officially assumes the presidency of the G20.
Yes, with this handing over, the G20 in Indonesia is over. And now India, from the 1st of December, will be the new president of the G20. In September next year, probably between the 7th and the 9th, all these leaders, 19 of them will converge. They will be in India. All of them are expected here, and they will be present in Delhi for the next G20 summit. Before that, there'll be a series of meetings, all of them in India, at different parts of the country, and at different levels. At ministerial level, at foreign ministerial level, all kinds of meetings will take place. But India for 1 year will set an agenda, and we will have to see how India negotiates this entire process, particularly in the case of a war going on in between Russia and Ukraine, which obviously will create some problems with the G20. Also tensions in the East and South China Sea. All of these things will have to be managed through very, very adroit diplomacy.
And the Prime Minister pretty much, Srinjoy, set the tone before the baton was passed over to him. He talked about inclusive development. He talked about women's empowerment, interconnectivity, technology, issues that clearly have a global resonance, pretty much giving the kind of message that India would like to convey once it assumes the presidency.
Oh, certainly. Economic development is the big issue, because India still has to go a long way to become a developed country. That is going to happen perhaps in 2047. We are still a long way away from that. That is one. The other thing, of course, it has to be equitable. And the world has to develop. And it has to develop equitably. That is the point that the Prime Minister has been making.
And one more question to you now, Srinjoy. Today is obviously a big day on the sidelines of the G20. Several bilaterals that have been planned for India. He's likely to meet Emmanuel Macron, Rishi Sunak. And the big mystery is whether or not there will be any bilateral at all with China.
Well, the new list of bilaterals clearly show that the last meeting will be with Rishi Sunak. Once that finishes, he will get on the plane. This is the first time there will be a bilateral with Rishi Sunak. This is the first time there will be a bilateral with the Italian Prime Minister. With the Italian Prime Minister, he has never met her. She has just become Prime Minister. Scholz, the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, and Prime Minister have met only twice. Angela Merkel was, of course, a very close friend. So, again, there has to be a rebuilding of the friendship between India and Germany. So all these meetings are coming up. The meeting with the Prime Minister of Hong Kong, all these meetings, and of course Widodo's meeting, because he is the guest. Modi is the guest, so Widodo is the host. You have to say thank you to the host, and that's going to be a big meeting too.
And what's the common thread that we're likely to see in each of these bilaterals? How significantly is the China factor going to loom large in terms of how these interactions with heads of state from different countries proceed with Prime Minister Modi?
That would be particularly so with the ones in this part of the world, Australia, Indonesia, Singapore, most certainly. With the others, the fact that the Italian Prime Minister and the German Prime Minister are virtually new.
Yes.
So is Rishi Sunak.
Yes.
So there has to be, as far as these three countries are concerned, there has to be a building of the relationship, getting to know each other. And this is, Modi has met Scholz only twice.
Yes.
He has not met the Italian Prime Minister. He has barely said hello to Rishi Sunak. So those things are going to be built up in these three bilaterals.
Right. Many thanks for that, Srinjoy. We're getting more reactions. Colonel Arasan Singh joins us on the phone line, as does former diplomat Mr. Anil Trigunayat. But Colonel Arasan Singh, coming to you, what are some of the tangibles that you'd expect as takeaways on the part of India assuming the G20 presidency officially now?
India clearly was seen as the leader G20, not just in the formal sense of it, but in the real sense of it, going by the bonhomie and respect and between Mr. Modi and the rest of the world leaders, and also the body language of Mr. Modi. And remember, this body language flows out of the confidence that that the country has generated. The economic confidence. Your geopolitical confidence. And when I speak of geopolitical confidence, remember this is at a time when Europe is in dire straits, and even when I'm talking to you, you know that missiles have been fired in Poland. Even if the Russians have fired it, they are forced to say that no, it's still not confirmed. And that is where, when the whole world is at flux, India is seen as a beacon of hope. So that is what geopolitics has done to India. Our moment of reckoning has come. Remember this. I say this with full responsibility.
Okay.
I'm a student of geopolitics, and this is India's moment, and this is India's century.
Right.
Nobody should have any doubts about it.
Thanks for that, Colonel RSN Singh. Let me take this across to Mr. Anil Trigunayat as well. Mr. Trigunayat, thank you for speaking to us. We've seen an escalation pretty much now over the conflict in Ukraine, with reported attacks in Poland, where at least 2 people have now been reported dead. The NATO is expected to collectively issue a statement in this regard. How do you see India's role right now, given the fact that what India has said with respect to the conflict in Ukraine has been echoed in the G20 as well, where the countries have basically said this is not an era of war?
Very true. I mean, I think that Prime Minister Modi was yesterday very categorical when he said that we have to find a way to cease the conflict and to come to the table. And that is where India has offered its good offices to continue to work. But unfortunately, the geopolitics of this conflict is continuing apace, and it is something that is very, very difficult to contain unless both sides are willing to, and especially the West, not necessarily Ukraine alone, are willing to come to terms. And it appears that there are some efforts. This is unfortunate that the missiles have reportedly been fired or misfired towards Poland, because if further escalation would mean a very, very dangerous situation. I mean, that's what everybody is trying to avoid at this stage. So I think that Prime Minister Modi and the rest of the leadership must be concerned about it, and I'd like to somehow find a way to de-escalate the situation. I mean, the first point of that is that if these 2 countries, or India or Russia and the West, are not able to find a modus vivendi in this regard, it is going to be an extremely difficult and precarious situation which the world cannot handle at this stage.
And the G20, Mr. Trigunayat, is often perceived as being primarily an economic grouping. But yes, do you think India's ascension to the presidency right now assumes a significant amount of strategic importance as well? What's the likely role that India is now expected to play, given that the world is witnessing a serious conflict between Russia and Ukraine right now? What's the kind of role that India will be expected to play as the president of the G20 right now?
Well, as you know, it's not only the president of the G20, which is an extremely important thing for India, but it is not an envious time in which one would assume the presidency when the situation is really in a dire straits. But since India has had a principled stand with regard to this conflict and other external interventions, be it in Iraq or Libya or anywhere else by the Western countries or the NATO, it stands to have a moral right to be able to become a reliable or a trusted interlocutor by all sides. But at the same time, as you know, that these superpowers have their own games. They also have their own agendas, which is how they are going to play it. But I think that Prime Minister Modi at this stage stands tall, as the previous speaker was saying, and is being listened to by all sides. And in fact, in my view, the world is actually they're looking for some kind of a way out of this crisis. And I think India is well placed to I would not say mediator, but to be an interlocutor for peace.
Right. Let me also take this across to Colonel Arasan Singh. He's still with us. Colonel Arasan Singh, the China factor, many believe, still looms large in terms of the kind of deliberations that members of the G20 are expected to have with each other. We saw a very brief interaction between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping yesterday. But do you see the two countries, at least at a bilateral level, taking more significant steps toward charting a peaceful future in the aftermath of what's happened in Galwan?
I see there are two facets to our relationship. One is the economic facet and the other is the strategic facet. And it is not uncommon for countries to, cooperate, in the economic facet, even if, the strategic facet is, marred by doubts and recriminations and, aggressive postures. Let's not forget the fact that these two important countries, Russia and India, they share a border. We share a border with China, or more, if you ask me more appropriately, with Tibet. But we share a 3,400 40 kilometers, frontier with China. So that is something which cannot be wished away with. So our compulsions, our motivations, our aspirations vis-a-vis China have to be different than many other countries in Europe and the West. But yes, when there is a strategic congruency of interest, we will look after our own interest, because ultimately all nations must defend, all nation states have to defend themselves. And we will defend our country, whatever it takes. But that doesn't really stop us from cooperating in areas, which is of mutual benefit. That would be injuring yourselves. So that is my way of thinking, and this is how countries actually operate in the international arena. And India cannot be any exception. We have sent a very strong message to China, not once, but many times, even Galwan. The problem is that Galwan, we have not exhibited or advertised our achievements.
Okay.
As much, the very fact that the Chinese had the colonel in this 20th Congress, that means they're very much on the defensive.
Okay.
Why do you? Yeah.
Right, Mr. Arasan Singh. Let me in fact also go across to Srinjoy Chaudhary as well. He's bringing us some more updates from the G20 summit. Srinjoy, how do you think the Chinese are viewing India's ascension to the G20 presidency? This is of course a rotational procedure, but how do you think Xi Jinping and the rest of China will be seeing India's role at the helm of affairs as far as the G20 is concerned?
Well, first of all, Xi Jinping will have to come to India next September. First of all, of course, they knew very well that it is India's turn, and India will be head of the G20 for 1 year. This is something China is very well aware of. But the important thing is really the bilateral relationship. Right. And we will have to see where that bilateral relationship goes, because China is very clearly the second largest economy in the world. China has a huge trade balance, positive trade balance with India. China is building up its military in a way that has not ever been imagined. Okay. So China is looking at building 30 nuclear submarines over the next few years. Now, this kind of growth has never been envisaged before. This usually happens in wartime. The Chinese are doing at a time where there is no war.
Absolutely.
Now, again, India and other countries, India and its partners and its friends, will have to take note of this.
Yes, Srinjoy, it's a big moment for India. We have officially assumed the G20 presidency. The baton has been passed to us, and the G20 summit will be held in India next year around September. Thanks for those inputs to both Colonel Arasan Singh as well as Srinjoy.